Alright, let's talk about it. Creators are leaving big automotive YouTube channels. What was once largely the domain of gaming or entertainment media channels is something we're now seeing on the vroom vroom side of the fence. In some ways, this has been a long time coming. You could even argue that it's necessary, because the nature of being a YouTuber is inextricably linked to feelings of instability. You can't know how a video is going to perform, and you can't really be certain what you're going to make from month to month because it sometimes relies on factors that have yet to be determined. And in a lot of cases, producing high-quality content isn't cheap, particularly if you're doing a build or traveling to locations to film. Maybe you have employees like editors, writers, photographers, etc. And that's if you even own the channel you produce content for. If not, then it's not really that surprising when that channel is sold off to a larger company to spread out the cost and production burden across a larger back, because holding up the world is less stressful when the load is being carried by somebody with bigger traps. But there's always a risk with this approach, and what we're seeing now is the consequence of things that are often outside of the control of the content creators we know and love. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The shifting tides of automotive YouTube, why things are changing as dramatically as they are, and why, at least in some cases, this is a good thing. I'll also get into what it's meant for RCR, and what it could mean for you if you choose to pursue the automotive YouTube space. Timestamps are included in the description, so you can skip around to wherever you want to go. And this video will largely be composed of existing RCR footage and the occasional public domain images, because I don't want to use other creators' content. So anyway, enough with the long introduction. This is the Roman Report. Let's get to it. Roman Report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars. It's kind of wild to think that arguably one of the biggest automotive stories of the summer has been about automotive YouTubers. In particular, the departure of Jeremiah Burton, Zach Job, and now James Pumphrey from Donut Media. It's a lot to parse through, and so I've included the respective Why I Left videos in the description, because these men speak for themselves far better than I ever could in synopsis. But the overarching thesis seems to center on displeasure with the overall lack of freedom that happens when the distribution network for your content is owned by somebody else. While all three men go out of their way to state that they still have an immense amount of love and respect for their colleagues under the Donut umbrella, and that they don't harbor any ill will, it seems like the experience was limiting for the type of content they each wanted to make, respectively, and all to diminishing returns. You see, when you have a successful YouTube channel, it's natural that people assume you have some piece of it, that you're an owner rather than an employee. But to my understanding, in the case of Jeremiah, Zach, and James, this wasn't true. Donut has been the property of digital media giant and private equity firm Recurrent Ventures since 2021, which would presumably mean that the talent didn't really have the editorial freedom they once had, which is understandable. Product is dictated by cash flow, which means the people writing the checks have the final say. But it's also understandable how this could be creatively frustrating, right? Since that creativity is often what makes a creator popular in the first place. Yet you see it in business all the time when a company buys something popular and then brings in people with MBAs to dictate a new direction, taking a straight razor to costs in the name of running a lean, profitable machine. In his video on why he and Jeremiah left Donut, Zach Job explains that he'd left his previous job before Donut specifically because they got bought out, and he wanted to get away from that type of professional environment, which honestly makes it kind of heartbreaking that history more or less said, hey, let's run that one back. Because the focus became less on producing the type of content they wanted to make, and more about trying to feed tinder into the fire to keep the channel's flame burning high. They had reached wild heights, unthinkable heights, and now they had to work twice as hard to sustain that. As Job says in the video, quote, I think it's a product of getting too big, growing too big, and then trying to just never drop down. And I think, I've always said one of the coolest things about YouTube is that you can take swings. You can try stuff you want to do, and if it doesn't work, you find out immediately, and then, you revise. And we stopped doing that a long time ago, and we just got to where we were trying to do videos we knew would do well. End quote. As Jeremiah would add, quote, "And when you have to convince people who are paying for it to do the videos you want to do, it gets old fast." End quote. They would go on to state that they got so exasperated with having video pitches rejected that they almost didn't want to pitch at all anymore. There wasn't the freedom to just try something out to see how it would perform. They would simply be told no. As a creative who is used to a certain amount of autonomy, that has to be devastating. And this sentiment largely seemed to be shared by James Pumphrey. Now, I was shocked to see that James was leaving even more so than Zach and Jeremiah, because I had incorrectly assumed, as so many had, that James had a piece of Donut, or that he just had some kind of equity in the channel so that any potential sale and change in content direction would have to at least partially go through him in some way, But it's not that cut and dry. James would announce his departure on Instagram, stating, quote, "Working for Donut has been the most incredible experience of my life. I never thought I'd get to build something that meant so much to me. I never thought I'd get to build something that means so much to so many other people." End quote. As James would continue, quote, "It's time to build something new, something that I love, a thing to be proud of, a thing of my own." End quote. In introducing his new channel, Speed, he signs off by stating that the channel is, quote, "independently owned and operated since 2024. End quote. Now, one could assume at least part of the reason for the departure based on how he signed off on that post. But it became all the more apparent once his "Why I Left Donut" video went live. Again, I've linked it below, and it's a pretty poignant retrospective of his time at the channel and his personal history in the automotive space. And at over 40 minutes long, it's well worth your time. But in the video, he explains his frustrations with how some of the decision-making by the higher-ups ran the risk of compromising his relationship with the fans, which is basically everything to someone in this space. Quote, "Now, this relationship that I've built with you guys over the last 9 years is something that I've worked very hard for, and something that I'm incredibly grateful for. It's also something that I am extremely protective over. It's what every YouTube channel is based on. The audience. You guys. And every time a company makes a decision, it has the potential to put that relationship at risk. And at Donut, I don't feel like I have enough say in what those decisions are, and whether or not we should take those risks. So I'd rather start a new thing where the only person I have to make decisions with is my best friend that I trust, because my relationship with you guys is one of the most important things in my life." End quote. He would go on to add, quote, "Now, I'm not saying that the decisions the company is making are bad, but the fact that I'm not making them, or sometimes even consulted, is enough for me to have to walk away. So I am." End quote. So the end result of each of these departures is that Jeremiah and Zach would start their own channel, Big Time, and James would launch his new channel, Speed. And what do you know? Both channels have already surpassed 1 million subscribers in barely a month's time. It really is a remarkable case of betting on yourself and proving that sometimes, maybe even most times, it isn't the brand that's the draw, but the personalities behind it. Although Donut seems to be moving towards less of a personality-driven platform in favor of a more enthusiast approach. Donut editor-in-chief Nolan Sykes would tell the Autopian how excited he is about the content they have coming up, including, quote, "going deep into drag racing," end quote, And also, quote, a new build coming that I've never seen anyone do on YouTube, end quote. He would go on to thank James for his contributions while vowing to continue celebrating car culture, and overall it was a pretty nice statement. But I think ultimately what's odd about this is that it's not like Donut is the only place where this is even happening. You see, Hoonigan has been an apparel brand, a racing team, a YouTube channel. They were essentially an empire, and in a lot of ways, it still is. But there were changes. Perhaps the necessary byproduct of the evolutionary forces that brought them to this point, you know? Hoonigan Racing Division, Hoonigan Industries. It was a success unlike anything that had occurred in the automotive media landscape up to that point, short of something like Top Gear or Motor Trend. The Gymkhana videos alone could have fed generations, but just like Donut, Hoonigan was purchased in 2021. In this case by an aftermarket parts manufacturer called Wheel Pros, who got the funding for the purchase from the firm Clear Lake Capital. And again, private equity rears its head. Wheel Pros just sort of adopted the Hoonigan branding themselves, taking Hoonigan's more brash, chaotic aesthetic and applying a sort of corporate sheen to it. This resulted in the now infamous tweet announcing Vance Johnston as the president of Hoonigan. The image they used showed him in a suit and tie, and, well, people didn't take too kindly to what was seen by fans as the corporatization of what had been a fairly down-to-earth brand. Creators began to leave, content began to change, and while views were generally still good, they weren't what they used to be. And it would be one thing if it had just been an issue of private equity attempting to fix what wasn't broken. But any hope that Hoonigan had of being what it once had been was shaken on January 2nd, 2023, when Ken Block tragically passed away. For a lot of people, Ken Block was Hoonigan, and nearly 2 years on, his loss is still keenly felt in the automotive community, in a way that I'm not sure can be explained by any one piece of media. Ken Block's final video for Hoonigan, Electricana 2, was published posthumously on December 6, 2023, some 11 months after his passing. And with it was truly the end of an era, as fans said their final goodbye to one of the most respected and revered people in the automotive community. Now, while Hoonigan continues to enjoy the success of over 5 million subscribers and hundreds of thousands of views per video, the public response remains mixed among fans. And that reality, that fans might not always rock with what you're doing, is scary. It's genuinely sad to see a channel you loved changing in front of your very eyes. And yet, we don't always know why these channels get sold in the first place. You know, beyond the very obvious financial incentive. So in the spirit of covering all sides, let's play devil's advocate, because I'm messy. Okay. So what are the positives of being owned by a larger company? Are there any positives? Okay, yes. Technically, yes. What are the reasons to sell to private equity in the first place? Well, for one, again, YouTube. You just don't know what's going to happen. You could be on top of the world one day, and then a simple change in the algorithm means nobody gets shown your videos anymore, because a bunch of ones and zeros have decided that you don't deserve to be seen by anybody, not even your subscribers, and not even when they've clicked that damn bell icon. That's terrifying, trust me, I know. But it's also kind of a cop-out to say that it's entirely the algorithm. I mean, if people genuinely like what you're doing, they will find you. They will watch your content. But it becomes less of a priority for viewers to track your content down if they're not really into the direction the channel is taking. Again, trust me, I know. But I'm also not under the expectation that I'm owed a platform, nor do I think anybody else in this space is under that impression. We are here entirely at the privilege of the company hosting us. In this sense, it's YouTube, or Google, or Alphabet, whatever. But sometimes that privilege is superseded by the company you sell to, if you choose to sell. I don't remember the name of the channel that tried to buy us out in the early 2010s, but Brian thankfully rejected the offer because it meant more to him and more to us that we retain our autonomy, that we retain the independence to sink or swim on the merits of what we create ourselves. Because if I'm gonna bomb, I'd rather bomb doing my own material than having it dictated to me by somebody else, you know? Letting good ideas sit on the shelf because somebody in charge doesn't see the vision? No. Just no. But I do feel a twinge of envy at the safety net that private equity could theoretically provide, as it also offers an infrastructure that could take care of the business side of things so you can focus on just producing content. And even saying that, it sounds kind of cynical. The word content itself sounds cynical. It sounds like a product, but it kind of is a product. And it's only as cynical as you allow it to be. Regardless, it is kind of understandable how a job that was initially really enjoyable to you becomes a 9 to 5 once you get into that mindset of gotta create content, you know? And being owned by a larger company can sometimes ease some of that burden. When you're on your own and balancing your own books, your budget, and you're doing your quarterly taxes and then your annual taxes at the state and federal level and the self-employment tax and all of those things on top of filming, writing, editing your videos, doing research into how to stay ahead of the changes in the algorithm, what thumbnails have to look like now, getting a green screen backdrop so you can take a photo in front of it, making a YouTube face that you can then cut out and put into a thumbnail. Figuring out what titles work best, you know? It's a lot. And it's insanely stressful. And it's also obnoxious because you sometimes can't tell people in your life how stressed you are. Because people don't really think of content creation as a real job because you're not clocking into an office or you're not really doing any labor-intensive manual exertion. And they assume that because you're mostly at home all the time, or because you're mostly doing something that you enjoy, or doing something in a realm that you enjoy, that it's not really work for you. But the reality is that, in some ways, it's worse. Because you can never slow down. You can never really clock out. You release a video and you almost don't have time to digest it before you move on to the next one. Writing a new script and hoping that you don't subconsciously repeat anything you've already said in a previous script, because you have a deadline to hit. Otherwise, you don't eat. And before you know it, the entire day has gone by and you never left your desk. You've rolled out of bed and into an office chair only to roll back into bed again. And suddenly the entire week has gone by and you've never left your apartment. It's incredibly isolating and extremely demanding. You don't just take your work home, your work lives with you. And while I consider myself very, very fortunate in that the work I'm doing is mostly work I enjoy doing, I have to admit that that's not always the case. For example, a lot of people have wondered why I don't do RCR stories anymore. Well, I've been sitting on a script that's about 75% done for over a year now, but I just don't have time to finish it, because those scripts take an insane amount of research. I'm not just digging up articles or interviewing people more knowledgeable than myself. I mean, I am doing those things, but I'm also tracking down books and purchasing them, even if it's only to cite a single quote from the entire tome. I'm reading entire books and annotating and taking notes as I go along before I even know if I can use any of it. And look, I love making RCR stories. But it's so time-consuming to make, which is kind of why the Roman Report even exists. I have a huge desire to continue making these kinds of longer-form essays, but RCR stories requires a depth of research that takes a George R.R. Martin length of time to complete, whereas the Roman Report is like 30 to 40% sources and then just 60% of me ranting my opinion about whatever it is I think of the topic at hand, while using existing RCR footage so I don't have to track down public domain images for use. After all, while I'm not sure RCR stories will ever beat the glorified PowerPoint presentation claims, it's still a lot to assemble because I'm dedicated to using public domain and free image sources as much as possible and crediting where I can, because I don't want to run into any problems with Content ID, which means it takes more time to make a video, and there's more pressure for that video to do well, and more disappointment if it doesn't. I think my mind would have completely shattered if I spent a year doing the sob video and it just flopped. But that's the risk you take, and I accept that. That's what I signed... Oh cool, my fleshlight is here. This is what I signed up for, and I understood that, and I don't regret it. I'm sure I could argue fair use if any issues were to arise, but that's not a fight I feel like waging if I can help it. So this is what I make because it's what I can do, even if there are times where it's not what makes me happiest. Now, again, the overwhelming majority of what I make is stuff I really want to. But I miss making RCR stories because I love automotive history, and there are so many tales I want to tell that I just don't have the time to do. Like the life and death of Oldsmobile, the life and death of Holden, yes, they were all killed by GM, the crimes of Carlos Ghosn, the Miracle Cars scam, etc. The June Roman report on the life and death of manual transmissions was something of a compromise since, while not comprehensive, it was a chance for me to get to delve into automotive history within the context of current events. And I enjoyed that and want to do more of that, and so we're trying to get the Patreon back up and running to subsidize a greater freedom from the algorithm. So I bring this all up as a way of saying that even while it doesn't appeal to me or Brian, I completely understand the attraction behind selling a channel. Because now you have somebody else to handle finding photographers, scouting locations, holding the camera, getting the shots, and doing all the editing, which frees you up to just focus on writing and presenting. And being a salaried employee of a company or corporation would presumably include some level of benefits. You might finally get health insurance through the company, so you don't have to pay as much as you were out of your own pocket. Maybe you get 401k contributions. And if you have other employees, well, payroll suddenly isn't your problem anymore, even if the trade-off is that you too are now on salary. But hey, it's one less thing to worry about. Maybe before you had to procure your own cars, speak with dealerships or brands or press fleets, and negotiate without the backing of a team of public relations specialists and or lawyers, all of whom cost a lot of money themselves. But now, it's somebody else's job to do all of that stuff. Now, RCR has been extraordinarily lucky in the sense that we were able to run the show ourselves thanks entirely to you, our viewers. When I say this show would not happen without you, I mean it. Because we didn't have to deal with press fleets, with automakers, with dealerships. Once we ran out of cars owned by people we know who were willing to be on the show, we'd built up enough of an audience that people were willing to volunteer their cars and their time to be on our show. It's why after almost every shoot, either Brian or I, usually Brian, will thank the volunteer for helping us to have a job. You guys are literally everything to us. Not just because of your viewership, but because of the ways in which you've given of yourself so that this show might exist. Not every channel is so fortunate. Other channels sometimes have to straight up buy the cars they're featuring in their videos, although I would imagine that's mostly the channels doing builds, with the intention of not simply earning money from the videos themselves, but from the eventual sale of the car. But for so many others, a partnership or a sale can actually make sense because now you're not worrying about procurement as much. Who knows? The company might even give you equity so that you're taken care of in the event the company is sold again, right? Except, as we've already established, that doesn't actually seem to be the way any of it works, so the devil's advocacy can pretty much end right now. As Jeremiah and Zach mention, they didn't have ownership in Donut. They took a salary, but the exchange was that the brand gradually became something they didn't sign up for. Suddenly, the insight and know-how of content creators who had been doing this for years before the brand was bought out by private equity are suddenly subordinate to the cost-cutting whims of businessmen who want to maximize profits to generate clicks, at the expense of the more thoughtful, involved content that initially drew the audience and even the hosts themselves. And for what? Are these actually seen as long-term investments by the companies that buy these automotive channels? Or are they just slimming them down, optimizing the content for search algorithms, and then hoping to sell the channel and its library for a profit to the next company looking to make a quick buck in online content, or the next company that's searching for videos to add to their streaming catalog. It's hard to say, but easy to view from a cynical perspective, because it doesn't seem like venture capitalists truly understand why these channels were successful in the first place. You see, automotive YouTube channels often find success because of the authenticity, the talent, the passion, the sincerity of the people both in front of and behind the camera. I mean, Jeremiah and Zach were two guys who basically answered an open call for talent and then built themselves as a brand alongside the channel over the years, right up through the pandemic when the channel saw unprecedented growth, as so many channels did during the time when everybody was stuck indoors, and productions were shut down around the world, and there were fewer mainstream entertainment options, meaning content creators were picking up the slack and growing exponentially as a result. It's a remarkable success story. Donut became one of the biggest automotive channels on the platform, and Jeremiah Burton and Zach Job became arguably the most beloved figures of that brand, along with James Pumphrey. So there's a kind of whiplash, I would think, that accompanies going from having a certain amount of freedom with your content to feeling limited as to what you could do, to suddenly having to run an idea past somebody to get it approved before you can put it into action. Which is why, in many ways, the negatives would seem to outweigh the positives when it comes to private equity. In addition to the aforementioned lack of creative freedom, you can also have your salary subject to reevaluation if the company determines you're not worth what they're paying you. You can have your role scaled back or cut altogether, and just like that, it's all over. And sure, maybe you had a deal to get a cut of all merchandise, but a cut is still not the same amount of what you could have if the company was all yours from the start. But possibly worst of all, after all that, unless you have some prior claim to your show and its assets, then your intellectual property will remain with the company while you have to start from scratch. Now, some people are capable of reinvention. In fact, I would argue the majority are. But not everybody is a Zach or Jeremiah type, or a James type, who can leave a company and instantly regrow or expand their audience. That's special, that's unique, and it speaks to those creators and their connection with their fans. But for most, it'll take time. Ultimately, it's clear that what Zach and Jeremiah and James were doing wasn't making them happy. And we only get one shot on this spinning two-tone rock, so when you have a chance to chase your happiness, then you better lace up those running shoes, get a good stretch in, grab a bottle of water, and start running. Because at the end of the day, it's ultimately worth doing. Oh wait, that's not the end of the video? Kinda seemed like a natural stopping point. So let's talk about the implications of this for automotive YouTube. For as bleak as this all might seem, I would argue that not since 2020 has the time been as ripe to seed new automotive channels as it is right now. If anything, automotive YouTube feels less niche than it ever has, as cars just feel more mainstream each year. Granted, that's anecdotal, but I want to say it's the Gen Z drivers joining the scene. Of course, I can't even say I know for sure, but I do think a lot of people inspired by the content of your Donut Crew and your Tavareshes and your Hoovies and Matt Armstrongs, you're probably going to start seeing a lot of them launching their own channels. And what's great about automotive YouTube is that really, you don't have to do builds. Hell, I would argue you don't even have to do car reviews, unless car reviews is in the name of your channel. You could get started with something low cost, like automotive history video essays, or repair tips and how-to guides, or even just complaining to the camera about what you don't like about the auto industry today. Build an audience, do unique things, or do traditional things in unique ways. Tavares gave us some great advice last year by saying you need to do content that you want to do, that matters to you. And it follows from a belief that has been sort of a North Star for me since RCR began, which is that you should always make content that you yourself would actually watch. If you're not making something you would watch, then odds are your lack of enthusiasm is going to come out in the product you eventually make, and it's going to turn people off. Whatever you make, be passionate about it. Don't just view this as a way to make money, even if that's ultimately the end goal. The way you grow an audience and keep them is by providing them with something they can't get somewhere else. And some people might think that means having some kind of gimmick, like this is the only channel where you're going to see builds of old Chrysler minivans or whatever. And that's definitely cool and could definitely be the thing that drives engagement and growth. Lord knows I'd probably subscribe. But what I mean by giving people something they can't get somewhere else is much more simple. Give them you. Because you, specifically you, is something that a viewer can't find somewhere else, because there's only one you. There's only one you that has your passion and your opinions. And even if your opinions are ones shared by other outlets, it's not the opinions that will bring people back, or at least not just the opinions, but your presentation. It's to see what you're going to say next and how you're going to say it, to see what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Your knowledge, or maybe your lack of knowledge, to where viewers get to go on a journey of discovery with you as you learn things you didn't know about. They get to watch you grow. They get to see your arc. Automotive YouTube thrives with more people contributing and taking away the niche label, because it really isn't niche, honestly. It's not that obscure. People of all stripes love cars, so why not get in on this, if that's your goal? Yes, it's a long, hard road, trust me, but it can be worth it if you can get there. And I've seen so many growing channels worth checking out, like Shooting Cars, or Samet Industries. If you remember Will, we reviewed his Ford Festiva a million years ago, and Brian still ranks it among the worst cars he's ever driven, but Will was still a really great sport about it. I even asked you guys on Twitter to recommend me some smaller channels that deserve more love. And you added channels like Alanis King, Corsicar, Tom's Refurb, Speedcar 99, Vehicor, I hope I'm saying that right, or at least getting in the general area of correct pronunciation. But it should be on screen right now. Also, Hunter Direction, and Robot Cantina, and I'm sure there are many more out there. And honestly, I'm rooting for each and every one. This all brings me back to the overarching thesis of this video. Yes, Automotive YouTube is changing, possibly forever, and that's a good thing. We're getting fresh talent, and the old guard is reinventing themselves and reigniting passion in their content. It's so amazing to see people bet on themselves. It's the most incredible thing to take that risk and have it pay off. I think Doug DeMuro talked about this in his video on this topic. But regardless, I envy their ability to do that, to take that risk. Automotive YouTube speaks to so many people because cars are germane to so many of our lives. When we're young, it's something we look forward to being able to do, to drive, to own a car. And even when we're adults, there's still this aspirational aspect of potentially getting to own an even better car. I think that's why automotive YouTubers have such a potential for a large audience, because it's so relatable. It's fascinating, and I think that's why it's so important that even if they have to leave the channels where they made their name, that these creators get the chance to truly make the things that they want to make. Because I feel like it enriches this space, so that even though the channels that we initially fell in love with through their content fundamentally change, those creators are still out there and their passion is still evident. And who knows, maybe the channels they leave have to pivot and rediscover a newfound passion of their own. I know a lot of people might not see it as likely, but I still feel like it's worth considering as a possibility. These YouTube personalities, these content creators, these are people we welcome into our lives via their content. And that content enriches us through education and entertainment. But the people who educate and entertain us are so much more than the people who educate and entertain us. Otherwise, I don't know that we'd trust them to do so. The unspoken covenant between creator and community is as old as the media industry itself. Give me something worth following, and I'll follow you anywhere. Automotive YouTube has often been referred to as a niche thing, yet I would argue that it has created a tapestry of vibrant creators with not only things to build or things to drive, but things to say, and things worth hearing. Best of luck to James Pumphrey, Zach Job, Jeremiah Burton, and everybody on this platform. To anybody and everybody chasing this dream. Because collectively, you all make this community better. Comment some smaller channels below that you think deserve some attention, and let's see if we can't spread this love, get a subscriber train rolling, and maybe become the rising tide that lifts these other boats. That would be incredible. And let me know what you think about the state of automotive YouTube, the reasons for the changes, and the outlook for the future. If you liked this video, please consider leaving a like, sharing the video, commenting, or maybe even subscribing. Maybe tap that bell icon. And if you really love RCR and want to keep this ball rolling for as long as possible, consider supporting us on Patreon. The link is in the description. We would love to be able to earn your support. Thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your week.